I'm Edward Warfield. I'm the publisher of Citybiz, and I'm honored today to interview Steve Coren, a partner at Kerstein, Coren, and Lichtenstein. Welcome, Steve.
Ed, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us about your practice area?
We're in a small firm. We have 8 partners, some of counsel, a couple of associates. All the attorneys handle different areas. We're pretty much a full-service law firm. I specialize in civil litigation. I handle personal injury, family law, mainly divorce, and also probate litigation, fights over wills and trusts. And we have people who are experts in real estate. We have one partner who specializes in representing doctors and medical professionals who have problems in front of licensing boards. That's pretty much all he does, and he's kept pretty busy. And we have people in corporate things like that, and trusts and estates, estate planning.
And so you've told us a little bit about the practice areas. What is the footprint of Kerstein, Coren, and Lichtenstein?
All of Massachusetts. I myself, our probate and family courts are divided by county. And I'm in most of them in eastern Massachusetts, down southeast in Bristol County, northeast in Essex, and then the urban areas, Suffolk, Middlesex, and Norfolk. Worcester, which is in the central state. And I've been out to western Massachusetts if the client wants to hire me and doesn't mind the distance. Although in this day and age with the electronics and technology we have, distance doesn't matter as much as it used to. And I know my partners handle cases from all over Massachusetts, and we occasionally make inroads up in New Hampshire as well. I've handled cases up in New Hampshire and Connecticut.
Can you share some of the highlights from your career, a probate sample, or divorce, personal injury? Some of the most important cases that you've been involved in.
And Friendly's felt there was no case because it was open and obvious. But when my client sat with her boyfriend, it was hidden behind a partition. His grandson suddenly ran out toward the open door onto a major highway, and she chased him. And a little part of the easel stuck out behind the partition, and she tripped over it and literally tore up her ankle. She was in a union where she operated heavy moving equipment on what was called the Big Dig in the Boston area, and could never work for the rest of her life. And the defense was convinced we'd lose, and we tried the case, and we got over $1 million. And the clerk told me it was probably the highest slip and fall they've ever had in Norfolk County, which is a very conservative county. So I had a very grateful client. And the injury was devastating to her. I just finished a will contest. And in Massachusetts, it's hard to overturn a will. You can claim that a person was subject to undue influence, meaning their independent will was overcome, or they were incompetent mentally on the day they signed the will. But you have to prove it, that on that particular day they signed the instrument, they're incompetent. And these fights are like divorces. They're bitter, bitter intra-family feuds. And you have to be able to emotionally withstand that and keep your distance. And my client was one of several brothers and sisters who mother had left the house to, and the other brothers and sisters didn't like that. And a lot of attorneys were involved. She finally hired me. And we defeated their claim that there was incompetence and undue influence, which was very big to my client because she and her son were living there. And if the house had to be sold, she'd have nowhere to go. And I was proud of that result, especially because the other brothers and sisters, one of them acted as the attorney for the family. So everything to him was personal, and it made things much more difficult to deal with. So those are 2 things I remember. One other case, it was not large in the scope of damages, but it meant a lot. And it got written up. A client was in the middle of a post-divorce proceeding, and a guardian ad litem was appointed. That's somebody appointed by the court to investigate custody and visitation. And the guardian ad litem was given records of my client's psychiatric hospitalization from 20 years ago and gave it to her ex-husband, who then showed it to the guardian ad litem, who put it in her report. They all denied doing that. We tried the case, and it was very apparent as each of them testified that they had done what they were accused of, and it caused my client terrible distress. Plus, she couldn't go to counseling because of it, because she was afraid that the person who disclosed the records would disclose further records. And I remember the jury went out at about 4 o'clock on a Friday. And usually juries don't like to come back if there's a weekend. And the judge said at 5 o'clock, we're done, come back Monday. The jury refused to come out of the jury room. Said, we're going to reach your verdict. At 6:30, they came back, and it was an emotional distress claim. And the damages were close to $100,000, which is very unusual for an emotional distress case. Usually you don't get verdicts that high, but I think there was some what I call righteous anger stirred up on the part of the jury that these people went and did something totally unnecessary just to hurt my client. And it was referred to the Boston Bar Association, and they got a lot of feedback. So they published an article on the case, and it was very, very well received.
So can you share some of your recent articles or presentations?
Most recently, I've published a number of articles, mostly in the field of family law. And I belong to an organization called the Massachusetts Academy of Trial Attorneys. And we've just started, and it's a personal injury gathering of plaintiffs' attorneys, and a very effective resource. We've started a family law section. I'm the chairperson of the section, and MATA, as we call it, publishes a monthly journal. And I wrote an article based on a case I recently had on financial statements. And in divorce, financial statements are the most important documents that will ever be filed. And they have to be accurate, because if it's inaccurate, somebody's going to be accused of lying on their financial statement. And a lot of attorneys in this field take it much too casually. And I gave it the title of The Importance of Being Earnest, a play on the old Oscar Wilde play, meaning you've got to be open, honest, transparent in presenting your financial statement. Don't play games, because the other side's going to find out. And if that happens, your client will lose all credibility in front of the judge. And the article was reprinted in a couple of other journals, and very well received. And I do writings for what's called MCLE, Massachusetts Continuing Legal Education. It's our biggest legal education organization. They give seminars constantly. And I have presented on what is the annual week-long divorce boot camp, where I've submitted writings in certain areas, use of experts in divorce, handling financial statements, filing motions, things like that.
So let's talk a little bit about your career and the role that mentoring has played in your practice.
That's a special subject for me. And I remember coming up in the 70s when I first started to practice, and there was no mentoring. And attorneys just really didn't want to give you much of their time. And so you learn through the process of humiliation and embarrassment. Learning your craft. And I always was very serious about becoming good at what I did. My craft was very important to me. I even once went to an attorney, I didn't know him very well, about advice on a case. He then sent me a bill, which is very unusual in our field, but he did. And I never forgot that. So in MATA, I started a mentoring section where we encourage inexperienced attorneys to join, and we assign them experienced attorneys. I mentor about 10 young or less experienced lawyers. I enjoy it a lot. It's a form of giving back, and it just pleases me to no end, because they're very profuse in their thank yous. It's like they realize how much there is to know, and how would they have learned that other than having a mentor and risking screwing up a case. And I find it very gratifying. Our section has really grown. We probably have around 30 MATA attorneys mentoring inexperienced attorneys. And it inspired, in part, the Massachusetts Bar Association to start its own mentoring program, which I'm also part of. But it's a labor of love for me, mentoring. And I think it's the obligation of any attorney to give back and help the next generation coming up, because it'll make them better lawyers. It'll reflect better on the profession. and they'll do the best job possible. And that to me is, it's one of our guiding lights in our law firm, competence and doing your best for a client and practicing ethically.
Let's talk about your interests outside the practice of law. You are a certified scuba instructor and an underwater photographer. Tell us about those interests.
Well, it's funny. I grew up on the water, and I've always been at home in the ocean and in rivers. And it always fascinated me that you could go underwater and breathe. And I always wondered, if they get water in their mask, how did they get it out? And I took a weekend course, which we fondly referred to back then as a kamikaze course, because you learned just enough to go out and do yourself harm. You really didn't learn how to dive and learn all the things about safety, but it gave you familiarity. And I then became employed part-time at the New England Aquarium. I was a diver there for 18 years, handling the animals in our giant tank, cleaning, treating the animals, feeding them, things like that. I became an instructor in 1976 and then went on to the board where we held institutes every other year to certified divers who wanted to become instructors. And in the 80s, 70s, I started to travel a lot to tropical waters. And then in the 80s, I met a person who was probably the best underwater photographer in the world. And he thought I had a good eye, and he let me use his equipment on some of the trips I went on to the northern Red Sea in Egypt and to the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific. And I got my own equipment and took 1 or 2 trips a year and started to get better at my craft and started to enter the photos and juried exhibitions and did very, very well. And I'm in the final stages of building a website. And I also finished a book, a children's book, about the story of a fish and using my photos to illustrate the different characters in the book. I've also incorporated it into my practice. I've represented diving groups. There's always been kind of a running feud between divers and lobstermen in New England, because lobstermen are convinced we raid their traps every day, which we don't do, but they're a little sensitive to that. And one town passed an ordinance sponsored by the lobstermen that went against the state law as far as displaying dive flags for a group of people as opposed to one person. And they insisted you have to have a flag for each person. So if 8 person dive, you have 8 lines in the water, you're going to get tangled up. The state law said you only need 1 flag for a group. So we challenged the law. And I argued it in court. We won. We overturned the town bylaw. And occasionally I'm called upon to either act as an educating expert for lawyers involving scuba diving injuries, and also to advise dive shop owners and operators as to liability issues. So it's become a big part of my life. I haven't gone diving in a few years, and COVID has stopped all trips, but I will share with you one thing. I'm used to diving with sharks, both in the aquarium and in the ocean. And now that great white sharks are on our doorstep on Cape Cod every summer, it's my goal. It's like my Mount Everest, my bucket list to take pictures of great white sharks in New England waters. And I'm hoping to do that next summer. And I've heard every lawyer's shark joke. We don't need to repeat those here.
So is there any part of the Steve Coren story, personally or professionally, that you'd like to share that you haven't shared with us?
You know, the practice of law has been my entire life. I've been practicing almost 50 years. People ask me why I don't retire. First of all, I don't know what I do with myself. I need to be kept busy. Secondly, nobody can fire me. I'm a partner, at least as far as I know. I like my partners. We all get along very well. And I like the work I do. I like helping people. I like guiding them through a foreign minefield of a system that is totally foreign and alien to people who are not familiar with the legal system. And I'm a big believer in being professional. Some lawyers aren't professional, just like in every walk of life, in terms of how they comport themselves, keeping arm's length from your client's emotional needs and remaining objective is a key part to being a lawyer. If you start to identify emotionally with your client, you stop being an effective advocate. And you also become very difficult to deal with for the lawyer on the other side. And you get a lot of that in family law. I'm on a Massachusetts Bar Association committee trying to explore ways to increase the professionalism and civility in the practice of law, especially family law. And there are no easy answers. I've talked to judges. Can you crack down on these lawyers? No, we can't, because they'll accuse us of being biased against them. We can't get out of our neutral role. So we're trying to figure out ways of approaching this. But I am happy to say that the majority of lawyers I meet in my practice are very good people, very ethical, very concerned about their clients, and who want to do a professional job. And that's one of the most important things I've taken away from what I've learned in my many, many years of practice.
Well, Steve, I've enjoyed listening to your career, and we wish you continued the billable hours to, when you get up in the 90s. So we wish you the best of luck. And again, thanks for sharing your story.
Ed, I've enjoyed my time very much. I enjoyed meeting you. Thank you so much for having me. And again, everybody stay safe and well.